Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome back to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. If you like to think of data as the new oil, then you can consider us Car Talk, because we focus on where the rubber meets the virtual road. And with me on this epic journey, road trip, down the information superhighway, although I think we have to be sequestered because of the pandemic, is Andy Leonard. How's it going, Andy?
Hey, it's going well, Frank. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing okay. We're in lockdown. I'm in. My wife is actually on an important work meeting, and I have the kids in the room with me. So you might hear a frequent interjection. But I understand that speaking of kids, we have a very unique guest with us today.
We do have Stephen Ray, my older son, is joining us for the first part of this, and we want to talk to him because, at least in his first part, because he is about to deliver his very first SQL Saturday presentation.
Yes, sir.
Very cool. So I know a little bit about the backstory to this. So, Stephen, why don't you kind of do an intro to yourself? Your just quick bio. I know Andy probably knows everything about you, but most of the rest of us don't.
Well, I'm for the uninitiated. I'm Stephen. I'm Andy's son, and or as I normally refer to him, Dad. I do stuff with small AI and neural nets. I also work with Raspberry Pis, IoT devices, specifically Raspberry Pis and Jetson Nanos. Working a little bit less with the latter recently. I've been doing more work with the Pis, and pretty soon on the 25th, I will be presenting my first SQL Saturday class. And I guess I just got lucky enough to do it on the first ever virtual SQL Saturday. Call it, whatever you want, luck or unlucky, based on the world events. I'll be teaching a class on how to install SQL Server on a Raspberry Pi 3B. And I'm working on a solution for the 4 as well.
Very cool. And it's my understanding that you're actually studying, was it telerobotic? Not telerobotics, but was it? There's a really cool $10 word for it that Andy.
Mechatronics.
Mechatronics. That's it.
Yes, sir. I'm
sounded
working on
like an anime cartoon.
Yes, it does. It's really just all the, I believe there are 12 or 13 official realms of engineering, or at least the ones that they teach in college. And it's sort of all of those mixed into one hyper-focused, really hard class. And I really just chose it because, when I walk into a room, if someone has a question, I just want to be able to answer it. I want to be sort of the most helpful I can be. And I figure if I'm well enough versed in as much engineering, as much of the realms of engineering as I can be, I figure I can be pretty helpful.
That's pretty
cool.
So
that's the plan.
A chip off the old block there, Andy.
Well, he, I'll say, Frank, he's probably better at it than me because his mom has a lot of background training in multitasking type tasks. She was a 911 dispatcher for a while, and to graduate from that course, they literally play 5 or 6 conversations at the same time. And she had to write down and track all of the conversations and respond accordingly.
Wow.
So it makes for a good project manager, which is awesome because I have exactly 0 of those skills. So he has more of that than I do, but I think he definitely gets his ADHD from me, which this is, Frank, we've talked about this, about weaponizing things that may be hindrances in some fields. And I hear some of that in Stevie's plans here, because rather than just go after one discipline, just pick a discipline of engineering, mechanical, or electronics. He likes the idea of kind of popping between disciplines. And I think he's kind of leveraging the ADHD there.
Yeah, I think that if you can, it's one thing to kind of play to your strengths and quote unquote fix your flaws, but I think there's a whole new level of self improvement that I've kind of discovered over the last 4 years or so, is weaponizing your flaws.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this with Anti-Fragile,
Right.
Anti-Fragility and Nassim Taleb's books on that. You and I are both huge fans, and I'm still working on getting him to come on the show, Frank. I don't know if we're going to be able to pull that or not, but I have two goals here, as you're well aware. One is to make contact with him, and two is to not get blocked on Twitter.
Yes.
So
although if you're for the listener, if you're not familiar with Taleb, he's been on fire lately with Twitter, as well as his one of his big shticks is risk prediction and risk modeling and risk management. Although he would call it something else, and he would probably smack me across the face for calling it risk management. But honestly, it'd be an honor to be smacked across the face by Taleb, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah.
But he's on fire both on Twitter, and he's making crazy money on the fund that he manages.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize he still managed the fund.
I didn't know either, but somebody reported that he made either 360%, 3,600% or 36 times. I don't know, whatever it is, but in March, he made a ridiculous amount of money, partly because I think he predicted a lot of the long tail effects of the COVID pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah. If you look at him on Twitter lately, don't get blocked for him though, please.
Yeah. I'll try not to.
I can live without kind of that pseudoscience biohacker knowledge from his Twitter feed, but I don't think I could live without Taleb's wisdom.
Yeah. Same here. Same here.
Which again, we will share that story in full detail later. But
you're laughing.
I am laughing now. We're going through that phase of kind of anger, denial, and all that. Now we're kind of laughing at it.
We're accepting. That's where we have accepted it, and so we gotten over it. But yes, we need to share that. But your poor child,
we have ignored him, and we want to talk more about his product. Now, you gave him advice that he should combine. The more shinies he combines, the more likely his proposal to speak would be accepted.
Yeah. And you know this, Frank, from our relationship, and I've been doing this for a long time. When I get, once I got to be able to speak, I started reaching out and trying to help others do it because it was such a rush. And I had a couple of mentees, I guess, actually present at the PASS Summit 2019 in Seattle back in November. And, that's just a huge, great feeling. And Stevie kind of picked up on that as well. You heard him when he was talking about his motivation. Part of it is he wants to be able to help just as much as possible. But he came to me, I don't know, 10 months, a year ago, and he said, Dad, I want to do a presentation. He's been traveling with me to events over half his life. And he said, the very first thing I told him is, I think that's awesome. You'll do a good job. But here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to get you picked because you're my son. But I'll do the same thing for you I do for everyone else. And I did. That was my next piece of advice. Was my first real piece of advice was pick something shiny. And by shiny, I mean, something new, a little edgy. And he picked two. And when he first told me about it, inside I was thinking, that's a pretty big bite. But I didn't share that until just now with him. But he jumped right in on it, Frank. And I would estimate in the first couple of weeks, he probably put 100 hours on this. And after that, he's probably been averaging, 50 or so hours per month or so. And I would say he's got a good solid 400 hours into it before he got it to work. And that was a couple months ago. He actually got it to where he got SQL Server running on one of our Pi 3s. So
yeah, that was a very interesting way that happened too. I solved it while hanging out. It honestly looked like I was building a weapon in a college. That was really where it happened. Is I was sitting in the lobby of the college my mother works at, and the HDMI cable was too short, so I had it hanging out of the port and everything. But I just kind of threw my hands up and laid back, and the desk lady kind of looks over me like, "Are you okay?" So it was a very interesting time. But when I finally got it, it was just like everything that I had been waiting for just kind of crashed down on me. All the money we'd spent on replacing the walls I was hitting my head into. It was worthwhile.
We've been there, Stevie. I mean, Frank and I have both done that, and I've shared this story. In fact, this is completely unrehearsed. I've shared with people on a bunch of different times when I talk in classes about this. Failure is normal. And my demo for that is I will walk downstairs on a break, and you and your siblings are homeschooled here. And I'll say, guess what my code just did? And what is it that you reply? In unison, usually.
Exactly what you told it to?
Exactly what I told it to, right. Not what I wanted, but exactly what I told it to, yes. But you experienced that.
And Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, you've experienced that. And what I shared with you as we were going through, and I do this with everybody that, I have an opportunity, and it's truly an opportunity. It's an honor to mentor anyone. When I have that opportunity, I share with them, listen, failure, you got to look at failure as the latest step on the path to success. And really what you'll see is when you succeed, the number of times that you fail will actually kind of set the bar, how good it's going to feel when you succeed.
Yeah.
Was I right?
Oh yeah, no, you were totally correct. It was you kind of get to a point where, and I explained this to my best friend who was he helps me work with this as well. And I explained it to him, and the way I kind of explained it was I reached a point where jumping off of a cliff was preferable to continuing to work on this. And, I just kept pushing through it. And finally, once you get to the end, it's just everything it just kind of collapses on you, really. It's like being in a building, and it just feels so good. Just all the weeks of hitting your head against a wall and being angry and not being able to figure out why it's giving you this error and that error, and why is this breaking, and why I can't get Docker installed after I've installed it 3 times before on the same kernel. It's all these things over and over and over again just finally hit you, and you just go, yes.
It's completely foreign to both Frank and I. We write code and it just works the first time every time. Right, Frank?
Oh, yeah, no, it's true. He's never come downstairs. I've never heard Dad come downstairs and go, dang, my code didn't work today. It's always just, man, that was perfect.
There's actually a cartoon where it shows the same skeptical look of a person in front of a computer, and it says, my code didn't work and I don't know why. That was the first caption. The second one is, my code worked the first time and I don't know why.
If your code works the first time, then either you've forgotten something, it didn't work and it's just not telling you, or you need to stab yourself with a fork and wake up.
Right. Or you kind of like something even worse is going to happen than what I anticipated.
Right.
Which I think a lot of folks, I learned this when I was doing a couple of years ago. This is back in the Windows 8 days when I was in evangelism. I spoke to a bunch of high school kids, and I kind of did this summer course on, writing apps and stuff like that. And like, I thought I bombed it the first day, like really bad, because it just compiler kept happening problems, and there were some driver issues, and I worked through it. And I talked to kind of like the coordinator with the local high school, and he goes, no, that was awesome, because a lot of these kids, they see how programming is represented on TV, and everything works the first time. And I'm like, right. I looked at him, and I'm like, we both kind of said in unison, nothing ever works the first time. And if it does, I'm very, very suspicious. But that's true.
Right.
A lot of folks, they think that they get their hands kind of dirty with code or STEM, and the first time, if it doesn't work, they think it's them. But no, I mean, that's frustration is on, fortunately or unfortunately, a large part of engineering.
Right. So and that's the issue. That's the issue I run into when I, tell people that I run into, or people that I know, that I work with computers, and, they tell me stuff like, oh, well, I'm not smart enough to do that, or that's too hard, I could never figure that out. And then there's two kind of groups, and that's the first group is, well, you're so smart. And
Right.
my answer is no, I just spend a lot of time in it. And the other group that I run into is that like are the people who, have seen what's the movie called? The Oceans movies. And they're like, and they ask me, how nice, how it feels when you finally hack the mainframe and get through the firewall. And it's really just like the reality that you run into when you start getting into doing programming and, engineering of any sorts, really, is that it's nothing like what it's portrayed in the movie and in the movies. And the general consensus of how it works is nowhere near how it actually works.
Right. Right.
I mean, it to everybody, it almost seems it's almost synonymous to rocket science. I've seen to the at least to the general public that I've talked to, is they think it's some sort of thing that you have to go to college and get a degree for, when in reality, you can learn it in your mother's basement in 6 months.
No, that's true.
It's
patience is underrated, I think, in our society, and particularly with this. And a lot of the folks that what differentiates kind of someone who is good at this is just the patience, the tenacity. I mean, you've demonstrated this. I think you've internalized it now.
Right.
But, a lot of folks, I think, in result of this pandemic are going to start pondering new careers, as they should.
Right.
Just it makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of folks have to realize that programming is frustration.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's definitely not a career that's for what's the word I'm looking for? Not short-minded, but sort of short-sighted. People who look for instant gratification.
Right. Although I would say that as someone who has been, I've never been formally diagnosed with ADHD, but people close to me have said I'm high functioning ADHD. Which is, I'm not going to argue with that. But there's a lot of folks who are quote unquote on the spectrum or on a spectrum of some sort who do work in tech, which is interesting. But because I think part of ADHD is, I'm not an expert on this, but is the ability to focus on one task for a very extended period of time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Hyper focus.
Yeah. So if you are listening to, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, no, I completely agree with you. That's really how it is, at least for me. I'm not sure how it is for other people with ADHD. I can't speak for everyone, right? But how it is for me is if there's a task that I'm just set on completing, I just do it. I mean, it's hard to really explain. I just have an idea and I want to do it, and I go and do it, and I do it until it's done. That's how it is.
Yeah, I think it's tenacity is the real skill. Tenacity and patience.
I like that.
And having an end in mind. Like for me, when I first learned programming, this was Steve, this is like probably Stone Age for you. I mean, there was no internet. I didn't even have a modem, which you probably don't even know what a modem is.
So what did you name your dinosaur? The one that you rode to school? Obviously, I know you had some for cleaning the houses, right? But what was the name of the one that you rode to school back in those days?
We called him Rodney. I don't know why.
Oh, okay, cool.
Probably because my dad was a Rodney Dangerfield fan. Which is probably another name you don't know.
I was going to say, now you have to go look that up.
Hold on 1 second.
Look that up in the Wikipedia, yeah.
It's like the Spider-Man movies again, where he's talking about those really, really old movies like Back to the Future and Aliens.
Right. Yeah, that was. Y'all
are giving me homework.
You'll experience this when you're as you get older. Like 20 years now is like an unfathomable amount of time.
Right.
But now it's like I look back and it was the year 2000. When it was 20 years ago. And I'm like, that wasn't that long ago in my head.
Not for us.
So you'll experience that. I was told that. I didn't believe it, but here we are. No, but I think that's key. I think a lot of folks, they isolate themselves from STEM And, you hear a lot about people who were, quote unquote, encouraged or not encouraged to get into STEM. This is back before STEM was an acronym. When I was a kid, I was not encouraged. I grew up in a very blue collar neighborhood. And it was kind of like you were wasting your time on a computer. And how I got into computer programming was my family had enough money to buy a computer, but not for the games for said computer.
Oh.
So my mom said to me after, getting it was actually 1984 in April. It was Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1984. I got a Commodore 64.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? I still have it. I still have the original Commodore 64 in my basement.
Oh, wow.
Next to my home office. And I remember saying, like, hey, I want to get this game. And it was like $40, which $40 was closer to $80 today. And my mom's like, just turned to me and said, well, why don't you write your own games? And I don't think she realized like what events she set in motion, because computer programming was not a viable career or perceived as one. Clearly it was, and Bill Gates's billions kind of point to that.
Sure.
But even when I switched my major from quote unquote a real major like chemical engineering to computer science, it took my family. It took a lot to convince my parents that it was worth the risk.
Right.
And that wasn't that long ago. Kurt Cobain was still alive. And again, yes, another name you might want to look up.
I do recognize the name. Yeah, it feels like it feels a lot like even now still. I can't speak for how it was before I was born, but even now, still today, there's still a bit of almost an aversion. Like there's obviously now because we spent more time with technology, it's been sort of baked into how our society runs. But there are still like the higher fields, I guess you could say, of technology, like higher in relation to the base stuff that we already use, as in like coding and programming and mechanical and electrical engineering. All of those are kind of seen as, I don't really know how to explain it, but like almost aversions from what we should be doing.
I think some places you see some resistance to it, but it's nothing like what both Frank and I experienced when we were younger. I mean, people didn't have computers in their home. Well, they didn't have computers in their home, so there was no idea about how pursuing that as a career. It was. I would make the illusion today. It's kind of like going into game development or something like that. And thinking you're going to make $1 million or $1 billion in game development, and it does happen today. It does, but and I encourage people to. I encourage you, go ahead and jump into it, but just realize that the skills you're going to learn while you're getting into that is probably going to be where you land. Somebody, in a 1 to 1 million ratio, there's still a 1. Somebody's going to be that 1, there's going to be a bunch of others who aren't. But you can still benefit from pursuing that. So, but what Frank's talking about, you've never seen. And you probably won't ever see. And I ran into the exact same thing. It's like, why don't you learn something useful?
Well, I remember the look of horror on my mom's face when I said I wanted to switch to computer science. And this actually had to do with a scheduling conflict because at the time I was in Navy ROTC. And at the time, they didn't have it on campus at my college. So I had to go to SUNY Maritime, which was on the other side of the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
So I went to Fordham. So I had to basically, in order to be there for PT and was it muster? I forget the words now. In order to be there, I had to be there at a time. I'd had to take the bus at like 4 a.m. So you can imagine from going from one part of Fordham in the Bronx to the other side of the Bronx, what the public transit system looked like at 3:30, 4 a.m. And that played a large role in me leaving the program. But I had there was a chemistry lab I couldn't make, so I had to take another requirement. So I took computer programming, and which was PL1, which is probably in a language you haven't heard, but essentially it was
No.
based on Pascal, which
Oh, okay.
is maybe a language you might have heard.
Yeah, I've
but,
heard of that.
I remember switching, and I was like, wait a minute, and the professor was saying, like, he was a retired IBM person, and he's like, oh yeah, like you can have a total great career in this field. I'm like, what?
Right.
And then at the time, they used to do this thing called newspapers, where they would actually print on paper.
What?
Wait, what?
Crazy, right? But the New York Times used to have this thing every Sunday. They'd have the job section, and it would be a pretty beefy like thing, and you could just search for different types of jobs. And at the time, the technology section was just exploding with like kind of like C++ kind of programming jobs on Wall Street and stuff like that. And startups were not in the vocabulary of anyone, I think, on the East Coast. Certainly not the New York City area. Everything was focused on Wall Street. And
Right.
I was like, well, there's my ammunition. So I my parents came over to visit me, and I remember being in like this big common area, and I was like talking to them like, I want to switch majors, and my parents were like, oh God, it's going to be basket weaving or some BS like that. And my dad, was like, I want to switch to computer science, and they were like, okay, is that a real thing? And I'm glad you asked. So I showed him, and at the time, like the salaries were like six figures in the early '90s, which was a lot of money back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my father kind of thumbed through it. I was like, well, these are not entry level. And he goes, no, but 5-10 years later, you could be making that.
Absolutely.
Boys, I'm on the phone. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
Working from home,
we all have
Frank.
kids here.
That's right.
So, and all right, so the little one just stormed off. So I remember, and my dad kind of thumbed through it was like 5 or 6 pages of just jobs for computer programming and stuff.
Nice.
And
wow.
My dad was like, okay, I'm sold. And my mom just looked at me like almost tearful. Like, you don't want to be one of those weird people in the basement, do you? Which is what
you ended up being you were already weird, Frank. I know I've known you now
weird.
15 years.
Well, I mean, what corporate IT was at the time, because she was a secretary, and they were the quote unquote high priests and priestesses that in the basement with the mainframe,
right?
And they kind of had their own little world. So I mean, it was definitely not encouraged. Now I say that, and if you hear in the background, because I'm going to keep it in for 2 reasons: one, it's funny, and 2, it makes editing easier. Is that one kid is on the iPad playing a Roblox game, and the other kid's on his laptop. Let that sink in.
Okay.
Playing the same game in Roblox, and they're fighting over something that happened in game that one did to the other. So I think going from that conversation of not being encouraged into STEM to here they are 5 and 10 years old, and they're both technologically literate, and they're fighting over a virtual piece of toy or something. I don't know.
Well, we had this conversation with Mark Tabadillo a couple years ago when he was on the show, and he talked about his concept of digital natives versus digital immigrants. And you and I are immigrants,
right? Absolutely.
Stevie and your kids have grown up with screens in the house from before they could remember. They were there when they were born, and they're digital natives. And one of the things I find funny and related to what you just described, Frank, is when my younger children, who are here now at the house still, even when they were young, especially when they were younger, they were playing Minecraft, and they would get hit by someone or some non-personal player there. What are those called, Stevie?
NPC, non-playable character.
There we go. An NPC would hit them. They would say, ouch.
Oh, yeah.
They would say, ouch.
I still do. When I get, say I'll get shot or something in Rainbow Six or CSGO, something like that, I'll still, say ouch, because to me, I'm just immersed.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's just how it is for me.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, and I would also say that there's to tack on to Mark Tabadillo's comment of digital natives and digital immigrants. Just because someone's a digital native doesn't mean that they are well versed in engineering around this. And I think that with my older son, who's 10, we were, before the school actually gave him schoolwork, we were I was trying to keep his brain moving. So what we ended up doing was I picked up a book of how to write your own first person shooter in Unity, and I'm like, yeah, we'll pick it up.
Boy.
And then it's a really cool book. He it was very frustrating because two things. One, the screenshots in the book are woefully outdated, and it's only 6 months old. That's just the way things are now.
That's crazy. 6 months.
And
right.
So we had to kind of figure out the documentation versus what the reality was. And and then he was frustrated because sometimes the code didn't work, or it didn't compile, or it didn't work the way it were expected. And he was really getting upset. And I was like, dude, this has been my life.
Right.
And he really was down on himself. And I was like, listen, dude, I started programming when I was 11 and a half. That's when I got the Commodore. And I don't know how many years it is now, 36 years later, it's still the same story.
Right. Well, also, another thing that I know now from working with Unity, that's not just his fault. That's also Unity.
No, absolutely. Well, and I'm looking through the documentation, and I'm like, yeah, this is, and he's a trooper. I mean, once the school started giving him schoolwork, we prioritized that. But he was a trooper. Like, he wanted to go through it. He wanted to go through it, even though he was frustrated. And I was like, he's got the knack. If you're familiar with Dilbert, right?
Right. Yes. Scott Adams. Yes.
Mom's an engineer too, so like it's kind of natural for him. So I mean, it's just one of those things where I just told it's okay to be frustrated, because that's kind of part of it. And sometimes to build something great, you have to go through frustration cycles. Actually, always.
Right.
That's how it works for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So cool, man. I'm excited about this project. Where can folks find? Since it's virtual, I guess you don't have to be in Richmond to attend.
Right, I don't.
Saturday.
Yeah,
right.
So it is SQLSaturday.com is the site you want to go to. And we're recording this on the 16th of April, 2020. And so it's going to be, since it's a virtual event, there's a possibility that it will be recorded. I'm not sure what their plans are for that.
I was going to say, I'm sorry to jump in. They actually said that it's all going to be live. They tried to work out something with pre-recording it, and Pass didn't approve it. So it's all going to be live. So
it's, once we get this up, it'll be the 25th of April 2020. So you can catch that. But what will likely happen, Frank, if people wanted to catch this presentation, is that, you and I and, our families have access to webinar sharing technology. I know, Frank, you do a lot on LinkedIn, and, it's up there for forever. We'll probably do a webinar and just let Stevie run it, from GoToWebinar is the platform I use these days. And we'll get a recording up. If you want to watch my blog, andyleonard.blog, and my social media feeds, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, I'll have an announcement up there when that recording becomes live. So I fully understand why Pass is making the decisions that they're making for this. They own the SQL Saturday brand, and it's their show. They can do it however they'd like to, but we can also do whatever we'd like here, and we'll get it up there.
It's like you read my mind.
Well, yeah, but I'm being polite.
I mean, that's the thing. It's their show. It's their house, their rules. They can do that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things with Pass. I'm going to try not to step in a big pile. But with a lot of things with Pass, at first blush, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you kind of think through it, it does make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's huge. It's a global organization, and they have a
lot of constituents to make happy.
exactly.
I get it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. Yep. So we're okay with that, and we can work around it so that folks can hear Stevie present. And that was in my plans already. I hadn't told him about it yet, so now you know. Act surprised when I tell you.
You can hear it. It's right. If you could see my face right now, I'm just so surprised. If you could see it through the rosacea of how hot it is in my room, because I turned off all my fans so you couldn't hear it in the background noise.
Oh no. So we'll do that. We'll get it up there, Frank. We're going to let him focus on this delivery. It's his first delivery. We all know how that, that first time presenting goes. And my experience first time presenting, I presented first to, it was at Virginia Beach. Actually, it was down in Jacksonville. It was when my very first presentation happened. But what I consider my very first one was at Virginia Beach in 2006, right after the first SSIS book came out. That I got to work on, that Rocks book, and 2 people showed up. So, I had practiced, I'd done all of the things, followed all of the advice, and 2 people showed up. So I had another one scheduled for the Northern Virginia SQL Server users group. And I thought, nobody's coming. And 125 people showed up, including Eric Veerman, who was the architect on the I forget the name of the Project Real, I think it was called, which during the betas of the 2005 reporting services, analysis services, and integration services, he was the architect for all of that, where they took some data you're very familiar with, Frank, because you used to work there, Barnes & Noble. They took Barnes & Noble data and they built a data warehouse. They built reporting services that were running off of both relational and analytics analysis services cubes, and they loaded all of that with SSIS. So he's in the audience, mind you. So I was, needless to say, it was different than the presentation with only 2 people in it. And you got to have that, Stevie, just like we talked about the engineering part of this. If you're going to start speaking, you got to have those kinds of failures too, and you got to treat them the same way.
There's no substitute for experience. And
Absolutely.
honestly, like the sooner you learn how to present your ideas and get comfortable public speaking, the better your life will be. I was told that in high school. We were forced to present to our peers. First time it was horrible, and then over time it became less horrible. Then it kind of became enjoyable.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But you get comfortable with it. It definitely is. And see, Frank, nobody told me that. And how different would would my life have been if I'd recognized that early on? I don't know, but I see you and I as dads encouraging our kids to move in these directions that we've learned later in life. Yeah. This is it's a good thing to do. Get this skill, put this tool in your toolbox. And just like every parent on the planet, trying to make a better life for our children than we've had. Not that our lives have been bad, so to speak. I've had my moments where it was bad. I'm sure you have as well. But that's our goal: make our kids' lives better than ours.
Yep. Right. No, absolutely. So we are almost at time. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show, Stephen, and I think. You got a good dad who's encouraging
your. Well, I mean, don't get him too excited. All right, you got to keep him humble.
I won't inflate his ego too much. But I always tell my kids that they should write out their complaint to child services on their iPad.
Awesome.
But. So with that, I think this has been a great kind of conversation, and I think it's always good to inspire the next generation of engineers. And I think you're doing some awesome work, and you're really getting a handle on how frustrating this field can be.
Yes, sir.
Because I've worked with a lot of civic organizations in and around DC, and where they want to portray the STEM field as this wonderful land filled of unicorns, Bitcoins, and Lamborghinis, but there's there's a big I want to keep our clean rating. Plus, you're his kid, so. But there's a big sandwich you got to take a bite of that isn't always necessarily the tastiest.
Right. No, I totally agree. It's like really with any field, there are the ups and the downs, and it just happens to with engineering just in general. It just happens to be that the downside is nigh constant frustration, and that's the art of how it is.
That's true.
That's how it's always going to be. That's how it is. If it wasn't like that, if it wasn't hard, this is something Dad has told me my whole life. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and it's not easy. That's why not everyone's doing it.
No, that's true.
And I mean, it kind of leaves room for the people who are really meant to specialize in that field to shine through.
No, that's true. All right, so stay tuned to Andy's blog. We'll find out more information about that. Andy and I are also, you're doing a lot of free webinars, Andy, and I am in the midst of organizing a virtual summit called Lemons 2 Learning, which at lemons2learning.com.
The number
sponsored
2.
by the Cave Johnson School of Business.
I was about to say, yeah, we need to get J.K. Simmons in here to do the voice for that, please. That would be astonishing.
If you missed the reference, it's from Portal, and
it's great.
I do want to print up T-shirts that say Cave Johnson School of Business.
Love
Go
that.
fighting lemons.
That's amazing. I need one of those so badly. I need that shirt so bad. I don't care if nobody else gets the joke. I need it.
I will put it. I have to put it on Teespring because the Amazon merch program is on hold because of the pandemic.
No, right.
So, makes sense.
Which I did have a run-in with a lawyer for a design that I did post. Although said lawyer, one day, this will be one of those stories that we will laugh about one day. And it's not like it ended poorly. Like, it was just kind of like,
right.
Said lawyer actually introduced himself nicely and kind of politely made a very polite request that is uncharacteristic of trademark lawyers. And I was like, you know what? Since you asked nicely, I'll comply. And I actually put that. So that let me save face and kind of be a little bit of snarky, but also do kind of the what I thought was a better thing. He made a good case. It was
got to stay on character.
Got to stay on character, of course. So with that, we'll let the nice British lady end the show.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen. Become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.